For most, starting afresh at a university or college is among the most exciting moments of their lives. People spend hours poring over their grades and applications to make sure they're perfect as they hope to gain a place at their dream school, and are enthusiastic about shopping for supplies as they prepare for the next big step in their life. Unfortunately, however, it is also perhaps among the most vulnerable stages of a young person's life, and tragically, there are many young people whose lives are stolen from them before they've really had a chance to begin. Here are two stories of murdered students whose cases remain unsolved. Cheri Jo Bates. Born in Omaha, Nebraska on February 4, 1948, Cheri Jo Bates was a bright and popular girl. She relocated with her family to California in 1957, where she was a varsity cheerleader at Ramona High School, as well as being active in the student government and an honors student. Described as being a sweet and outgoing girl, Cheri had dreams of becoming a flight attendant when she had finished her education. She enrolled at Riverside College after graduating high school and worked part-time at Riverside National Bank. After her parents' divorce in 1965, she moved in with her father. On the morning of October 30th, 1966, Cheri and her father attended Mass together before sharing breakfast at a local restaurant. In the afternoon, she decided to go to the college library to work on a research paper. Cheri called her friend Stephanie twice, once at 3 p.m. and once at 3:45, asking whether Stephanie would like to accompany her to the library, but Stephanie declined during the second call. It's estimated that Cheri reached the library between 4:30 and 5 p.m. Although one eyewitness claims the student left her home in her distinguishable lime green Volkswagen Beetle at around 6:10 p.m. in the evening and headed in the direction of the library, closely followed by a bronze 1965 or 1966 model Oldsmobile. Cheri made it to the library and, according to witnesses, she studied until about 9 p.m. Allegedly, a young man around 19 or 20 years old was seen lurking in the shadows across from Cheri's vehicle and had been staring in the direction of her car around 9 p.m. He was described as being 5'11" and wearing dark clothing. Cheri's father waited up all night for her to return, and he even checked in with Stephanie, who confirmed that his daughter had had no plans to stay away overnight. In the morning, at 5:43 a.m., Cheri's father filed a missing persons report. Less than an hour later, at 6:28 a.m., a groundskeeper found the 18-year-old's body on the grounds of the college. Cheri was sprawled face down on the gravel path between two unoccupied houses near to the parking lot. She still wore her pale yellow long-sleeved blouse and her faded red pants. Her woven straw bag remained, and there were no signs of sexual assault or robbery. Her clothing was bloody but unmoved, and she had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest and left shoulder, with slashes to her face and neck. 10 feet away lay a cheap, paint-splattered Timex wristwatch with a 7-inch circumference. Police also found a peculiar footprint of a shoe by Leavenworth prisoners, sold solely in military outlets. From the very beginning, investigators could discern that Cheri had put up a fight, despite her tiny 5'3" frame. She had scratched the assailant's face, arms, and head, and had clearly torn off his watch. Fragments of skin and brown hair were discovered beneath her fingernails. Her autopsy showed that she had been repeatedly kicked in the head, in addition to receiving 2 wounds to her chest. The weapon was described as being 1.5 inches wide and 3.5 inches long. Cheri's death was shown to have been even more brutal when she was found to have cuts to her left cheek, upper lip, hands and arms, and 3 slashes to her throat that had severed her jugular vein and larynx, almost decapitating the unarmed 18-year-old girl. When authorities looked at Cheri's car, they found that the ignition wiring had been deliberately pulled loose. The ignition key was in place, and both the windows were partly rolled down. 3 library books on the subject of the US government were lying in the front seat, and smeared palm prints and fingerprints were found on the vehicle. The investigation was nothing if it wasn't thorough, and an abundance of witnesses came forward, making authorities and the local community feel certain that the perpetrator of this horrific crime would see time behind bars. Within 24 hours, 75 individuals were interviewed in regards to the murder, with many of them being students at the college, and members of the nearby Air Force Base were questioned as well. By November 6th, all but 2 individuals known to have been in the college at the time of the murder had been traced and eliminated. 2 separate witnesses came forward, telling investigators of the screams they'd heard on the night of the murder coming from the direction of Terracina Drive, where Cheri was found the following morning. Utilizing this information and the expertise of the coroner, police determined that the 18-year-old was murdered around 10:15 p.m. Authorities went on to organize a reenactment of Cheri's final moments in the library, hoping that some vital evidence or witness may come of it. All participants were required to wear the exact same clothing they'd worn on October 30th, and those with cars were asked to park it in exactly the same spot as it had been on the night of the murder. 62 students were present for the staging, plus 2 librarians and 1 custodian who'd actually been in the library on the evening of the killing. Everyone was asked to stand or sit where they had been on the night in question. But while this reenactment seemed to trigger the memories of several witnesses, none could provide any successful leads. Investigators theorized that Cheri's Volkswagen had been tampered with and disabled as a ploy to lure the students from her car. The killer likely offered his assistance before attacking her in the dimly lit drive, which was partly shielded from witnesses by shrubbery. It's proposed that Cheri was forced from the vehicle to the scene of the murder while the killer stood aside or sat inside of her car. 1 month after the murder, 2 identical typewritten letters arrived at 2 separate locations. One appeared at the Riverside Police Department headquarters, whilst the other turned up at the editorial offices of Press Enterprise, a local newspaper. The author of the letters described in detail of how he had first disabled Cheri's car and then watched her attempt to start it until the battery died. He then offered his assistance, claiming his own vehicle was just down the street. Allegedly, after the 2 walked a short distance from the Volkswagen, the author said, "It's about time," to which Cheri replied, "Time for what?" only to be met with his chilling response, "About time for you to die." He then proceeded to clasp a hand over her mouth and press a knife against Cheri's neck, forcing her to the dimly lit alley where he savagely beat her before stabbing and slashing her. Since the letters included details which hadn't been released to the press, investigators believed that the author could be the true killer. However, later DNA taken from the letters did not match DNA found under Cheri's nails. On April 30th, 1967, Press Enterprise printed an update stating that both police and Cheri's father had received handwritten letters which read, "Bates had to die. There will be more." However, police considered both of these letters to be a hoax. Many theorize that the death of Cheri Jo Bates is linked to the infamous Zodiac killer, and that perhaps this was his first kill. The MO is similar to that of an attack on a couple in 1969, which was definitely carried out by the Zodiac. Further supposed proof that the Zodiac was responsible for the student slaying is a desk found in the library inscribed with a macabre poem and graphic imagery about assaults upon young women with a bladed weapon. The inscription was discovered 6 months following Cheri's death, and according to one handwriting expert, is unquestionably the same handwriting as that in the Zodiac's letters, plus the letter sent to Cheri's father. Furthermore, a letter dated in March 1971, which the Zodiac wrote to the LA Times, took credit for the murder of Cheri. Outside of the Zodiac killer, the only suspect in the case is a man referred to either as Bob or Billy, and was named as a suspect around 1968 when an informant claimed that Bob was bragging about the murder of Cheri. Cheri and Bob had attended the same school together and dated in the weeks before her death until she returned from San Francisco, where she'd gotten engaged to her steady boyfriend and broken off the courtship with Bob. Allegedly, the pair had had a public fight on campus during which Bob had struck Cheri just days before the killing. Then, on the day of the murder, Bob was playing basketball with his friends before receiving a phone call from Cheri. He then left shortly afterwards. Another friend of Bob's came forward, telling authorities that on the morning of the 31st of October, Bob was crying and told the friends he had snuffed Cheri. Bob's family confirmed he had a Timex watch similar to the one found at the crime scene, and that they never saw it again afterwards. It was also uncovered that Bob's sister worked at an Air Force base, and it's speculated she possibly gave her brother the shoes which matched the crime scene as a gift. Reportedly, witnesses saw 2 men at the crime scene with flashlights on the night of the murder, suggesting Bob may have had an accomplice. His best friend was questioned and failed a polygraph test. In the early 90s, he admitted he'd run into Bob at a restaurant on the night of the 30th of October, and Bob had requested a lift to campus to look for a lost item. The best friend would not admit to any knowledge about a crime when questioned, but another polygraph test suggested he was truthful, except regarding questions that might implicate himself in the murder. Despite this strong suspect, no one has ever been charged in relation to the murder of Cheri Jo Bates, and her case remains unsolved. Cheri was laid to rest on November 4, 1966, in Crestlaw Memorial Park. Her parents and older brother were among several hundred mourners present. Suzanne Jovin. Born in West Germany on January 26, 1977, to parents who were both scientists, Suzanne Jovin was set to make her parents proud. Highly intelligent, she fiercely made her way through the tough German education system as a child and bagged herself a spot at one of America's most distinguished universities, Yale. Excelling in everything she did, as well as being musically talented, Suzanne worked as a tutor through the Yale Tutoring in Elementary Schools program, and also sang in the freshman chorus and Bach Society Orchestra. Not only this, but she co-founded the German Club and volunteered with a program which brought together students with mentally disabled adults. On December 4th, 1998, Suzanne dropped off the penultimate draft of her senior essay around 4:15 p.m. and then prepared for a pizza-making party she'd organised at Trinity Lutheran Church for the program she volunteered with. By 8:30 p.m, after helping clear up, Suzanne drove another volunteer home in the university station wagon which she had borrowed earlier that day. Around 8:45, she returned the car to the parking lot and then walked the 2 blocks back to her second-floor apartment. Just before 8:50, friends passing by Suzanne's home asked her if she wanted to go to the movies, but she declined, and by 9:02 p.m, she had logged into her Yale email account. While speaking to a friend in German, Suzanne told the friend that she'd leave some study materials for her in Suzanne's apartment building lobby, once she got them back from an unknown person. This person has never been identified, nor come forward. At 9:10 p.m, Suzanne had logged off her email. Shortly after, she headed out on foot to Yale's old campus to return the car keys to the university. And at 9:22 p.m, she bumped into a classmate who was out for a walk. In a later interview with the Yale Daily News, the classmate, Peter Stein, said, "She did not mention any plans to go anywhere or do anything else afterwards. She just said that she was very, very tired and that she was looking forward to getting to sleep." He also mentioned she was not wearing a backpack, but was holding more than one sheet of white A4 paper in her right hand. She was walking at a regular pace and didn't seem nervous or excited. Peter and Suzanne shared their encounter for about 2 to 3 minutes. It's presumed that Suzanne returned the keys around 9:25 p.m, and she was last seen about 9:25 to 9:30 by another student who was returning home from a hockey game. It's unknown if Suzanne was heading straight home or was waiting for someone when she was last seen. About 25 minutes later, a passerby called emergency services reporting a woman bleeding on the corner of Edge Hill Road, 1.9 miles from where Suzanne was last seen alive. Police were on the scene in minutes, discovering the barely alive body of the student. She had been fatally stabbed 17 times in the back of her head and neck, and her throat had been slit. The 21-year-old was lying on her stomach, with her feet on the road and her body on the grassy area between the road and the sidewalk. She was fully clothed and still wore her watch and earrings. A crumpled dollar bill was still in her pocket, and her wallet was at home. Suzanne was pronounced dead at the hospital at 10:26 p.m. Suzanne's autopsy led to the discovery of a part of the murder weapon, whose tip was found lodged inside of her skull. The remainder of the knife was never recovered. According to ABC's 2020, a news show, the medical examiner claimed that only 1 out of the 17 wounds she had suffered was fatal. The knife is described as being 4 to 5 inches in length and made of carbon steel. DNA was found under Suzanne's left fingernails, and her fingerprints were found on a bottle of Fresca, which was located in the bushes in front of where her body was left. Also on the bottle was the palm print of an unidentified person. Both of these details were kept out of the public until 2001. The only store in the vicinity of the campus that sold Fresca at that time of night was Krauser's Market on York Street, 1 block south of Suzanne's flat. The store does maintain a surveillance camera system, but police never checked it, nor did they speak with workers who were on shift that night. It is unknown why they didn't follow up this lead. Witnesses came forward as the police began their extensive investigation into what happened to the young, intelligent German American. Reportedly, a brown or tan van stopped in the road facing east, adjacent to where the body was found. This information was not made public until 2001, and although a van was impounded this same year in connection to the murder, no link was ever established between it and the student. Another alleged sighting was of a man in his 20s or 30s, described as having an athletic build, well-groomed hair, dark trousers, and a loose-fitting, greenish jacket. He apparently ran from the scene like his life depended on it, in the opposite direction from where Suzanne was murdered. This sighting was withheld for a decade as police wanted to show the witness an image of the student's thesis advisor to determine if they were who the witness had seen. He was not, and so they didn't contact her again. A sketch of the unidentified man was then released. While there were no witnesses to Suzanne's movement after the student spotted her whilst returning from hockey, it's assumed that she either entered a vehicle voluntarily or was forced inside, as the distance between where she was last seen and where she was found is too big a gap to be covered in such a small amount of time. After this, progress in Suzanne's case becomes slow and sporadic. In 2009, Suzanne's parents wrote to the governor, asking for forensic investigations to be properly carried out given how much techniques had advanced since 1998. In November that same year, results showed that the DNA beneath her fingernails was contaminated, as it matched a technician at the Connecticut State Police Forensics Lab. The main suspect in the case of Suzanne Jovin was her thesis advisor, James de Van Velde, who was publicly named as such 4 days after the murder. It took 15 months for police to admit that they had no physical evidence tying him to the case, and it seemed that the only theory investigators had was that the student was carrying out an illicit affair with her teacher. However, her friends and boyfriend disagreed with this notion. Authorities then speculated that perhaps Suzanne was unhappy with her teacher given he had criticized her paper in some way, and this had caused some sort of rift between the two. They claimed that having Van de Velde as a person of interest was not a presumptuous one, but no real motive was ever given. As a result of this bull in a china shop method, Van de Velde's career was all but destroyed. His spring 1999 classes were cancelled because his presence would be a major distraction, and his reputation was heavily tarnished. In 2001, Yale University, after a lot of pressure from several different parties, hired a private investigative team who found that no DNA or print evidence from Suzanne and the crime scene matched Van de Velde. In 2012, a group of area residents told the Jovin task force about a former Yale graduate who'd committed suicide after telling friends he was convinced he'd be imminently arrested for murder. However, the task force declined to investigate this information. The murder of Suzanne Jovin remains unsolved. It does seem that the police did not thoroughly investigate the case, and it is unknown why they chased Van de Velde as a suspect for so long, ignoring all the other evidence given to them. Now, over 2 decades after the murder, it is unlikely we will ever see justice for Suzanne. And there you have the facts. 2 unsolved cases of murdered students. Please leave your own thoughts and speculations in the comments section below, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.